Chapter 6 of Fact Stranger Than Fiction by John Patterson Green. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Sojourning in Dixieland. On the day following my graduation, I found myself acclaimed in the daily newspapers and by my friends generally as being little less than a hero, for my address on the night previous had been on the subject "The True Hero," and by all classes of our citizens without regard to race or color. I was congratulated and praised for such success as I had attained to. There had been a tendency on the part of persons who were friendly to the interests of the freedmen to encourage my efforts during my course at the high school, and if I had not succeeded, it would not have been for the lack of sympathy and goodwill. A rather humorous incident occurred on an occasion when I was the invited guest of some of the colored people of Akron, Ohio, as their speaker in 1867, when the late General Bierce was mayor of that now large, populous, and wealthy city. When the hall was well filled and the time was opportune, Mr. Morgan, one of Akron's foremost colored citizens, arose and said in substance that he was happy to have present with them a young man who was making a manful struggle to secure an education after having first bought a home for his widowed mother. "A true hero," shouted Mr. Morgan, then extending his right hand and waving it in an inviting way, he exclaimed, "Hero, come forth." Since then I have been introduced to many audiences, but none that I can now recall carried with it the fervor and admiration of Mr. Morgan's. In very truth, I did not feel on the day after graduation that I had accomplished much, and for the first time the true significance of the term commencement as applied to the graduating exercises of high schools and colleges dawned on me, for it is the commencement of a course in a college or of the studying of a profession for the future, and the individual who, graduating from an institution of learning, imagines that he has finished is grievously mistaken, for he is only commenced. My old and esteemed friend, the late Andrew J. Rickoff, Esquire, for many years superintendent of the schools of Cleveland, came to me and advised me to study law. "It will be just the thing for you," he said. Also came the late Judge Jesse P. Bishop, successful and wealthy lawyer and deacon in the First Baptist Church, who extended to me an invitation to occupy a desk in his office under the immediate supervision of the late Captain Seymour F. Adams, a gentleman and scholar, for the purpose of studying law. Had I known then what I know now, that no man need expect to be a successful attorney at the bar, in the full significance of that term, who has no social intercourse with the business world, I would have declined the kind offer with thanks, and betaken myself to the study of medicine or theology. But being ignorant in the premises, I jumped at the offer, entered his office, and thereby, I suspect, I spoiled a good doctor or preacher in making a poor lawyer. I literally devoured Blackstone, Kent, Bishop, Biles, Stephen, Parsons, and other great commentaries on the English and American law during the ensuing 4 months, reading, as I truly believe, by day and by night, well nigh as much as the average reader would cover in a year. One fine day in stalked a man who, from his personal appearance, proved himself to be facile princeps, easily first amongst civilized men. He was tall and of commanding stature, with a frontal and cranial development which might have turned even Webster Green with envy. The remainder of the hair surrounded his bald dome, was thin and fair, while above his classic features, peering forth from shaggy brows, were his deep-set eyes, penetrating and knowing. Meet the Honorable General John Crowell, lawyer, ex-congressman, then president and factotum of the Union Law College, located in Rouse's Block, top story, northwest corner of Superior Avenue and the public square. "Young man," he said, "what are you doing?" I answered, "I'm reading law." "Why don't you come up to the college?" he replied. "Because I have no money," I rejoined. Thereupon he quite generously extended to me an invitation to become one of his class, and he added, "When you get into the practice you can pay me." Needless to say, I took advantage of his kind offer without delay. I joined his class, in which I found already entered a number of fine young men, amongst whom I can now recall Cullen Coates, late a justice of the peace and lawyer of Cleveland Township, Honorable J. T. Garver, now presiding judge of the Sandusky Fremont District, Augustus Zering, successful lawyer, and the late R. L. Colden, who died in ministerial orders in C.W. 51 years have elapsed since those halcyon days glided by, but I can never forget the pleasure and profit which I derived from the fraternal intercourse which I found in the midst of those big-hearted, kindly disposed young men. They seemed anxious and willing to aid me in every way. I love the memory of them. I am minded of a humorous anecdote which in those days was related once in a while, with the approval of General Crowell, which I will here insert, for great and learned as was Prexy, he was not thin-skinned. It was in this wise. Once upon a time, when the General was a candidate for Congress, he was anxious to secure the friendly cooperation of an old acquaintance who was not aiding him in any respect, so he gave a dinner to which was invited as many of the Independents as he could persuade to attend. The pièce de résistance on the well-filled table was a suckling pig, of which the lukewarm friend ate quite ravenously. At this point the auditors were wont to ask General, did he vote for you? To which the General replied, damn him, he voted against me with my pig in his belly. Judge Garver, who was elected because of his merit, has deployed at the bar, and as prosecuting attorney of his county has proven that the electors made no mistake in elevating him to that distinguished and useful position. When I visited Fremont some years ago, he met me at the station, and in his own private conveyance showed me the town, so to speak, a rare treat indeed. Afterwards he conducted me to his own home, assigned me to his guest chamber, seated me at his dining table with the other members of his family, and made me, in other respects, quite comfortable and happy. Just 50 years subsequent to our school days at the Union Law College, Judge Garver was assigned by a justice of our State Supreme Court to preside over one of the branches of our Common Pleas Court in Cleveland to assist in cleaning up our overcrowded docket. When becoming aware of his presence in my hometown, I extended to him and our beloved Honorable Willis Vickery, one of the judges of our Court of Appeals, an invitation to visit us at our home and dine with us and several others of our intimate friends. To our very great gratification, both gentlemen accepted the invitation, and we were all honored by their presence and society during the greater portion of one pleasant summer afternoon. To say that we were all elated, highly pleased, only partially expresses our feelings on that occasion. Speaking for the colored members of the Cuyahoga County Bar, I think I make no mistake in saying that at all times since Judge Vickery's promotion to a judicial position, he has manifested for us a friendliness which has won from us for him not only profound respect, but feelings of gratitude bordering on love and affection, for he has generously thrown into our hands thousands of dollars which were needed and saved, for his action would never have come within our grasp. In the course of a few fleeting months, our course completed, we received our diplomas duly signed by all the members of the faculty, and carrying the seal of the college on it, and almost like Milton's description of the eviction of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden, we took our leave of the General and his college. The world was all before us, where to choose our place of rest, and Providence our guide. We, hand in hand, with wandering steps and slow, through Cleveland took our solitary way. During the time I attended the law college and read in Judge Bishop's office, I supported myself by working in the restaurant and confectionery of N. Heisel and Son, underneath the judge's law offices, and also by doing the janitor work for the late W.C. McFarland in his law office. A portion of the time I slept on a couch in the back of the bank of the late George W. Wright, banker, broker, etc. Now I had 2 diplomas, but as yet no visible means of support other than that of waiting on table. I almost blush to tell it, but truth is great, etc. I married when I was in my 25th year of age, and with only $3 at my command, and the happy bride was the fortunate possessor of the sum of $3 and $50 to $100. But she, like me, had a place of useful employment, and we were happy and hopeful in the love and confidence of each other. Before long, a dear cousin of mine residing in the Palmetto State, South Carolina, having heard of my varied successes but being ignorant of my marriage, wrote to me extending an invitation to me to come and be his guest until I could select one of 3 places of employment, then vacant and awaiting my arrival. And elated by the prospect of entering upon speedy and remunerative employment, my little wife and I began to prepare to exchange our residence temporarily for that of the mild and sunny South. Some of my old schoolmates and well-wishers of both races, hearing of our proposed removal, tendered us a reception in a hall near the public square, and in return for music and oratorical pyrotechnics contributed a snug little sum, which we used for the purpose of tickets as far as our route as Wilmington, North Carolina. I shall never forget the impression which the white sand made on my mind when in the gentle moonlight our train stopped in the suburbs of Wilmington on one January eve, 1870. We both thought it was snow, although in the car we were quite comfortable, but imagine our surprise when on alighting we discover it was beautiful white sand instead. As we were being driven to the residence of our hospitable friends, the Sampsons, long-time residents of Wilmington, intelligent and wealthy withal, we perceived that instead of being frigid as we felt it 24 hours before in Cleveland, the atmosphere was delightfully balmy. These good people, former friends and associates of my deceased father and my mother, tendered us a royal reception, which put us perfectly at our ease, and persuaded us to believe that the longer we remained their guests, the better they would be pleased, thus manifesting the proverbial hospitality of the Southern people of both races. The late Mr. James Sampson, founder of the family, was a colored man who was held in high repute and respect even by the slaveholders before the emancipation, and they not only permitted him to walk the streets of the city after the curfew bell, but respected passes signed by him for other colored persons. He was a builder by trade and profession, and himself occupied with his family one of the most comfortable residences there, which I am informed is still standing. One of his sons, the late Professor Benjamin Kellogg Sampson, who was graduated from Oberlin College in the latter 50s, was a scholar and an orator of note. For several years in the 60s, he was principal of Avery Institute, located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Subsequently, he took charge of the colored schools of Memphis, Tennessee, where after many years of faithful service, he died regretted and mourned by all. John P. Sampson, another son, was a minister of the gospel and served faithfully many years with honor and success at Orange, New Jersey. Then there were Joseph, who was recorder of deeds of Wilmington during the Reconstruction period, and James, George, and Nathan, all worthy men. Also Susie, Fanny, Mary, and Minerva, all well and happily married. Upon the whole, the Sampsons were one of the most honorable, successful, and conspicuous families that existed in any of our slave states before, during, and subsequent to the Civil War. Mr. and Mrs. Duncan Holmes were very dear friends while we remained in Wilmington, and did all that big-hearted, generous people could do to make our visit both comfortable and pleasant. There was a gentleman long since deceased, William Kellogg by name, the father of Mr. John Kellogg, for many years trustee and chorister in Mount Zion Congregational Church of Cleveland, Ohio, who was elected one of the aldermen of the city of Wilmington, which we all considered an honor, for to be one of the city fathers is an honor conferred on any man. Now Mr. Kellogg, a colored man, had for years been in the employ of O.G. Parsley and Company, merchants in some subordinate capacity, and when after his election Mr. Parsley addressed him as plain William, he took exception, saying, "My name now is Mr. Kellogg." "Well, then," replied his employer, "if your name is Mr. Kellogg, you can get out of my place, for I don't want any Mr. doing the work which you are employed to do." And Mr. Kellogg thereupon left the store of his old employer. We colored friends considered Mr. Parsley's treatment of Mr. Kellogg unjust and uncalled for, but I suppose when one considers that the knell of the Southern Confederacy had so recently been sounded, the slaves manumitted, and in some instances placed in official stations, the conduct of that gentleman was quite natural. On invitation of two former associates, Messrs. Robert and Cicero Harris, who had gone from Cleveland to Fayetteville, North Carolina, where they found the State Normal School, I sailed up the Cape Fear River to that old and noted city. Fayetteville was doubly endeared to me by the dual facts that my dear parents were married there in 1837, and there were a host of good people residing there to whom I was related by ties of blood. The reception tendered me by every one who knew me was more cordial than I had anticipated, which is saying much, and the memory of it will always remain green. When I appeared on the platform in the church where my lecture was delivered, at a signal from Mr. Robert Harris, the principal, the large audience, consisting in great part of the students of the school began to sing lustily, "Johnny Green has come to town. Johnny Green has come to town. Ho, ho, for Johnny Green." By this manifestation of regard and sympathy I was greatly pleased, and considered myself highly honored, and the result of the collection which was lifted enabled me to pay our fare, the remaining distance to our South Carolina destination. Mr. Robert Harris, the principal of that noted school, married a beautiful little lady, an ex-member of the school, whose name was Mary Green. I regret to state that he died in the flower of his manhood, while he was engaged in the performance of his truly valuable educational duties, so essential at that time for the welfare of the colored people of that state. His brother and assistant, Mr. Cicero Harris, subsequently became a minister of the gospel, and by reason of his extraordinary intelligence and conspicuous piety was ordained a bishop of the A.M.E. Zion Church, which position he held and actively served until his recent death. Those who knew Bishop Harris best, who were most closely related to him in his life work, declared that they had never heard escape from his lips a word which would have offended the ears of the most refined lady or gentleman. This was the testimony of Mr. Charles W. Chestnut, the famous author, who in his boyhood and youth was under the daily instruction of the two brothers, and who ultimately succeeded to the principalship of the school, and also of this writer, who knew and associated with them both when they resided in Ohio. Returning to Wilmington after my delightful visit to Fayetteville, we speedily packed our trunk — it was not large — and bade farewell to all our friends who had cared for us so unselfishly, and I might say lovingly. We left them with genuine regret, some of them never to behold again. We were fortunate while in Wilmington in being of the invited guests at the wedding of Mr. and Mrs. George W. Sampson. Mr. Sampson is now for 62 years has been a useful and respected resident of the city of Cleveland, Ohio, where he and his wife have reared and educated 2 sons and a daughter. The eldest is Professor George W. Sampson, Jr., an alumnus of the Western Reserve University, located in Cleveland, and for many years principal of important educational institutions in Ohio and Florida. Mr. Fred Sampson engaged in useful employment on one of our great trunk railroads, and Mrs. Hattie Sampson Dale, the beloved wife of Dr. Ellis A. Dale, one of the skilled and useful physicians of Cleveland. A slow, jolting ride of 100 miles carried us to the station of Laurinburg, North Carolina, the only excuse for the existence of which is, so far as I could see at that time, was that it afforded a watering place for locomotives and a shipping and receiving station for the farmers in the neighboring territory. Here we were met by 2 of our numerous cousins. Mr. William R. Brewington, long since deceased, presided over horse and buggy, while his brother James Brewington, in his employ, curbed and restrained the mule team attached to a wagon. William R. Brewington was in some respects a unique personage, for since I was born, although I have come in touch with many quaint and curious people, yet have I never seen his double, either physically or temperamentally. William, when a mere child, had been bound out, as the expression was down south in those days, to a carpenter and builder, ostensibly to be taught the trade of his master, but practically to fill the position of a factotum, a do-all. My dear mother, who knew of his hardships and adversities through the 8 trying years of his apprenticeship before he reached his majority, used to tell us children of the lack of proper and sufficient clothing during the cold winter days, the cravings of hunger which every half-fed boy experiences, the undeserved floggings inflicted on him by his cruel taskmaster, and much else, until even before we ever saw him, we grieved for him through sheer sympathy. And now here he stood in our very presence, the master of his trade, a respected contractor and builder, the owner of broad acres, as well as a residence, a little grocery store, a horse and a mule team, to say nothing of a pretty wife and several interesting children. Yes, here he stood, his arms outstretched as he would fly to grasp in the comer, and his countenance beaming with smiles, welcoming us to Laurinburg, the gateway from North Carolina to South Carolina, Bennettsville, Marlborough County, South Carolina, 20 miles distant, and reached from that place by traversing a blazed way through a dense forest and thick sands. Soon mounted my little wife in the buggy by the side of our dear cousin, and I on the crest of a pile of bags and boxes in the wagon. We rode into the town of Bennettsville, where along the main, only business street. The inhabitants, few in number, seemed to be on the qui vive to behold Mr. Brewington's cousin John, whose coming had been heralded, and his little wife, whose coming was a genuine surprise to all. Finally we halted in front of a rudely constructed frame residence, which stood on the corner of the main street and another, which gradually merged into a country road, leading to and passing by the village blacksmith's shop and the swimming hole. Beyond these was the imposing residence of the late J. W. Weatherly, a retired speculator in slaves, built by my cousin William under contract. Opposite the Brewington residence was a field, which ere long was gorgeous in its garb of beautiful cotton blooms, and later on glistened in its crop of snow-white cotton. On another corner was the spacious field, in the centre of which stood the cosy home of the late Charles McCall, who in an emergency would shoot and sell to us a nice chicken, and on a third side was the humble residence of old Mr. Whaley, the watch and jewelry repairer, who even then tremulously stood with one foot on the edge of the grave. On entering it we discovered that our future temporary home was neither lath nor plastered. The frame of the building was weather-boarded, and this protected us from the wind and rain. Later on, during a light snowstorm remarkable for that locality, the snow filtered through the cracks and crevices of the shingled roof and lay lightly on the spread which covered us. However, we were young, and a little thing like that did not discourage us. On the contrary, it was to us a source of much merriment. Cousin Molly, the wife and mother, greeted us in a kindly way, and made conditions as comfortable for us as she could, while little Nelly and Lula were a never-failing source of pleasure to us both. On the following day I was informed by my dear cousin that 2 of the 3 remunerative positions which he had guaranteed me upon my arrival in Bennettsville had already been filled, to wit, the school to teach and the postmastership in the little post office, the former by a competent young lady, a protege of Mr. Henry J. Maxwell, the state senator representing that district, and the latter by a young freedman, at once ambitious and capable, Cato J. Stewart by name. Under the circumstances, the only position left vacant for me was that of clerk in cousin's little 12-by-16 grocery store, where he and Molly had been accustomed to barter sparingly domestic provisions for seed cotton, that is to say, cotton from which the seeds had not been removed, some of which, I'm bound to say, came in the dark of the moon. Imagine this writer then in those surroundings, in the centre of a cotton-producing district, removed from even a railroad station, the nearest one being at Society Hill, 14 miles distant, not a picayune to spend in his pocket, fresh from the social and educational walks of the beautiful city of Cleveland, and the business and hustle of such cities as Pittsburgh, Washington, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York. Was I discouraged? No, I was not discouraged. I was surprised, more or less shocked. As for myself, I did not care a fig. By the help of God and my determined efforts, I had won my way from hunger and want down to that moment, and I was armed, not to suffer, but to conquer. The little fair-haired wife by my side, leaning upon me for support and encouragement, she it was whose very patience and resignation to endure all things, to live or die, confiding in and cheering her husband, stimulated me and nerved me to toil on and hope on, until the silver lining of the cloud which enveloped us became visible. No pay was given to me for my services in the grocery, save our keep, which consisted of a fireless attic to sleep in, and salt mackerel, salt pork, bacon, fried or boiled once in a while, with collards and corn dodgers, black coffee sweetened, generally with dark brown sugar or molasses. There was at that time no market in the town, and cotton being the principal product of the farms in that locality, it was extremely difficult to procure vegetables, poultry, or eggs, even had I possessed the financial means of buying the same. Later on, in that year 1870, a little baby boy came to our home, and when the mother pled for some chicken broth, I could not in any way procure the coveted luxury for her. Finally, I walked down the road past the swimming hole, a mile from the village, to the home of that same ex-slave speculator of whom I have spoken, Mr. Weatherly, and being received courteously by him, I pleaded with him to sell me one small chicken for my sick wife. Without hesitation, he ordered one of his servants to catch a chicken for me. He presented this bird to me, and scorned payment for it. Whatever else he may have been, his conduct on this occasion, the only time he and I ever met face to face, was that of a kindly disposed gentleman, and I shall ever remember him in gratitude. We could not buy a morsel of fresh beef in that little town, save and except on rare occasions when some countryman would drive in with the carcass of a little butchered bullock covered with green branches to protect it from the sun's rays and the flies. On one occasion beef in this manner was brought into the village, but before we became aware of its presence it was all sold. The little baby boy had not yet arrived, and my loved one craved a piece of that beef. Cousin William was the proud, happy possessor of a good-sized chunk of it, but neither he nor Cousin Molly would give or sell me a piece. We were not their guests then. So disconsolate, but not cast down, I went to the home of one of the white citizens, who I was informed had bought a piece of the beef, and laid my condition before him. His dwelling occupied a commanding position well back in the yard from the sidewalk, and was guarded at night by a large fierce dog, which was generally kept chained in the daytime. I unsuspectingly and fearlessly entered upon the premises, when, to my amazement and horror, that savage brute came bounding directly towards and up to me. What defence could I make? What could I do? I had no weapon. I was empty-handed. Looking the dog straight in his eyes, I snapped my fingers at him and spoke kindly words to him, when he, to my great relief, wagged his tail and trotted along by my side until I was accosted and met by his master. With every manifestation of true gentility, this southern man, to the manor born, as the current phrase was at that time, cut off from his portion a nice large piece of that beef, and presented it to me gratis. I carried it to my wife, and had the pleasure of seeing tears of gratitude standing in her beautiful eyes, by reason of that man's unselfish generosity. I'm sorry I cannot recall his name. It was 50 years ago, and memory fails me. On another occasion we needed a little tea, black or green tea, it mattered not which. In order to procure, I was compelled to send to Wilmington, North Carolina, for it. And needing a dentist later on, when I had come into the possession of a little money, I was compelled to travel 130 or 40 miles, and place myself under the skillful treatment of the late Dr. Rodrigue, of the old regime, in Charleston, in order to repair the damage done to me by a native dentist, one who did the best he knew how to do, but who, after 7 ineffectual attempts to draw a wisdom tooth, merely broke it off and exposed the nerve. When the fall approached and the cotton crop was laid by, Cousin William suddenly discovered that my services in the little grocery store were no longer needed, that he and Molly could attend to it until after picking time. This condition left me and my family substantially homeless, for we could not remain there, pensioners on their bounty, and I was not in a financial condition to go elsewhere. There was a man in that county, John G. Grant by name. He was the probate judge of Marlborough County, and since his term of office was nearly ended, he was seeking the Republican nomination for re-election, and knowing that I was active within the ranks of that party, he sought my friendship and assistance in that behalf. Green, he said to me, why don't you rent Brewington's corner room and open a grocery for yourself in it? I told him I had no money to rent the room with, and least of all to stock it with groceries. Well, he replied, I have 7 barrels of spirits of turpentine, which is quite valuable. I will ship it to Adrian and Vollers, large dealers in Wilmington, North Carolina, and you can go there and invest the proceeds of that spirits in groceries and start your store. A drowning man will grasp at a straw, and I hurried to avail myself of this opportunity, although one of the conditions was that he should be a silent partner and receive 1/2 of the net profits of the business. This was on Friday, the next day being the day of the Republican convention, by which he was duly nominated for a second term, I assisting as best I could. The next day, Sunday, after attending divine services and superintending the Sunday school, I began to collect money to pay my fare to Wilmington, in order to collect for the spirits of turpentine, buy the groceries, and ship them to Laurinburg. It was not an easy matter to borrow $9 or $10. I had $3 belonging to the Sunday school. I appropriated that with a proviso, and I returned it out of my first earnings later on. Senator Henry J. Maxwell loaned me $3 other, and I reckoned on borrowing 3 others from another cousin of mine, Mr. John Brewington, on reaching the station, which, as I have said, was 20 long miles distant. At 7:30 on that Sunday evening, as the shades of night were falling fast, and while the bell of the neighbouring church was sweetly inviting swinners and others to come, fondly embracing my well-nigh disconsolate wife, who stood in the door holding little Johnny in her arms, she weighed 95 pounds, I started on my hike to Laurinburg. The intervening 7 miles before reaching the forest was through thick sand, and since I wore a pair of boots given me before leaving Cleveland by the late Frank Judd, which were snug on my feet to say the least, they began to pain me to an uncomfortable degree, but I gave no heed to that. That last image of my wife and little one, standing in that door dependent and forlorn, and the expectancy of securing the means of making them comfortable and happy, stimulated me to such a degree that I literally devoured space, and sooner than I expected I found myself at the beginning of the blazed way on the edge of the forest. It was now quite dark, save as the moon and stars ever and anon peeped through the foliage and revealed to me the ruts made by the wagons which traversed that route, and some familiar objects which I had seen before, the occasional hooting of an owl, and the quaint noises made by other tenants of the forest lent a weird charm to all the surroundings. Mile after mile reeled off, never wearying, not once complaining, although by this time my heels and toes were blistered, and my gait was somewhat halt and lame. To add to the seriousness of my plight, the sky was now overcast with heavy clouds, and some big drops of rain began to fall as the rumbling of ominous thunder began to be heard in the distance. Under these conditions I failed to discern my landmarks, and I found myself out of the direct route, and was compelled to retrace fully a mile of the distance. The night is long that never finds the day, says one poet, while a profound philosopher, more prosaic, carries the same idea when he says it's a long lane that has no turn. And so I found in this instance, for at 11:30 o'clock, exactly 4 hours from the time of starting, I knocked at the door of Mr. John Brewington at the end of my first lap, and was welcomed, footsore and weary, with mingled feelings of joy and surprise. After answering many questions hurriedly asked of me, I laid myself on a rough counter with an empty raisin box for a pillow. In the morning, when I attempted to pull on my boots, I found that my feet were too swollen to admit of success, but as time was precious, I put a little soft soap on the side of the heels, and so succeeded in pulling them on, splitting the inner side of one boot leg, however, in doing so. The blisters on my heels and toes, the swollen condition of my feet, and a pronounced pain in one hip, caused me to limp along in a very ungainly way from the house to the train en route to Wilmington. I must not forget to state that Cousin John loaned me $3, and thereby assured me the means of returning from Wilmington. Arrived in a few hours in the city of Wilmington, I went as the crow flies to the wholesale house of Adrian and Vollers, and immediately introduced myself to Mr. Vollers, a quiet appearing man of very few words, who had before that day neither seen me nor heard my voice, and for aught that I know to that day had never even heard tell of me. In a few moments he made me aware of the fact that on his part he had neither seen nor heard of the 7 barrels of spirits of turpentine. Thereupon I said to him, Mr. Vollers, I've spent my last cent for tickets to this city from Bennettsville, South Carolina, and return. I left behind me a frail wife with baby in her arms, and I dare not return there without this bill of goods. I am the cousin of William Brewington, with whom you are acquainted. Can't you let me have the goods on credit? Mr. Vollers looked me straight in the eyes. How much do you want? He dryly inquired. Here is the list, I replied. In a few minutes he had made an estimate of the cost of the goods. $110 was the amount. You may have them, he said. But, Mr. Vollers, I exclaimed, I've not a dollar with which to pay the freight on them. Well, he said, we will pay that for you. If an angel of light had spoken to me, I could not have been made more happy. Truly God was with me, truly as a reward of merit in return for some kindnesses on the part of my dear deceased father, or some one closely related to me. God was blessing me, and I silently lifted up my heart in thanksgiving to him, from whom all blessings flow. The goods were placed on the same train which carried me back to Laurinburg on the next day, and a few hours later I again found myself on that same platform with a pile of merchandise, and Bennettsville 20 miles away. What was done, what to do, a glance told me both. So says the poet Reed, when describing Sheridan's famous ride to Winchester 20 miles away. But in the case of the writer, a glance did not suffice, for I was in a semi-hostile country, a stranger to every one, and without the means of employing friends or foe to transport my merchandise for me. Let no youthful reader of this narrative forget the time-honored maxim, where there is a will, there is a way. I love and confide in those old maxims, for generally they have come thundering down the ages, and contain great truths for our guidance and encouragement in many of the perplexities of life. Inquiring of sundry persons whom I met in the one business street, I was finally directed to the home of Mr. Edward Roper, a youthful, hard-fisted, good-natured, kind-hearted Negro man of family, a freedman, so called, who had spent the greater part of his life in bondage, until the immortal Abraham Lincoln issued the proclamation which broke his bonds asunder. Fortunately, Mr. Roper was at home, and gave me a right hearty welcome, his good wife and little ones joining him. An invitation to eat followed, which was accepted, and then, after listening to my tale of woe, he hitched his mule team to his wagon, loaded my goods into it, invited me to sit on the seat beside him, and set me with my goods down at my door in that far away Bennettsville, and all this without exacting from me any money whatsoever, but simply relying on my individual oral promise to pay him when able to do so. Whatever may be said detrimental to the Negro race by persons who, for one reason and another, do not admire it, I, a person in whose arteries flows a modicum of that selfsame blood, here and now record my knowledge and belief that for love and filial affections, sympathy and generosity, patriotism and martial heroism, industry and a philosophic, hopeful, poetic temperament, it is not surpassed by any race of people on the face of this habitable globe. And Ed Roper was one whose blood had never been tainted by an admixture with that of any other race. During my absence, Ed Sawyer, a friendly carpenter, had procured some lumber in a sort of Wild West way, built me a counter and a meat stand, and placed some shelving in the corner room referred to in the foregoing, where on the first day of my experience as proprietor I sold out nearly everything except my scales, knives, and fixtures, and sent a rush order for supplies to Wilmington, together with a money order for the payment of my original order. In explanation of my rapid sale of all my small stock of groceries, I will state that it was one of the results of a hanging which took place on that day, and which attracted a large crowd of people to that town, the county seat, to witness it. This was a legal hanging, however, in accordance with the required forms of the law. The name of the unfortunate victim was Barry McIntyre, a young and good-looking colored man who, in an evil moment, had decoyed his wife to a lonely place near a gloomy pond, and after killing her had thrown the body into the pond. For some reason that could not be explained, one of the arms of the victim was missing, and although the defendant finally made a full confession of the crime, yet he to the end denied the dismemberment of the body. The gallows was erected in the public square of the village, without any attempt to screen it from public view, and numbers of the onlookers stood near the foot of the scene. When the trap was sprung, the body plunged downward, breaking the neck of the victim, I suppose, for when an attempt was made to shorten the rope and clear his feet from the ground, it was limp and unconscious. I do not believe the man knew what killed him. After the execution, the crowd thronged the groceries, and their patronage was welcome and beneficial. In the course of a few months, my income from the grocery was such that I bought a lot on a hillside fronting on the south side of the little square, and erected thereon a humble residence and storeroom combined. Long piles from the bodies of pine trees supporting the rear of the house, which was raised about 10 feet from the slant of the hill, while the front rested on low sills near the brow of the same. The depression between the sill of the house and the mainland was planked over. Here, owing to my political activities and social endeavors, my business grew rapidly, and in the course of a year I was well established. In the month of September, 1870, the 20th day of September to be exact, I made application to be admitted to the bar of South Carolina. Judge J. M. Rutland, a carpetbagger, presiding over the Court of Common Pleas of that district. There were 2 other applications filed on the same day by 2 promising white young gentlemen, residents of that town, J. Knox Livingston and H. Hope Newton, both of whom were admitted during the course of that day. But in my case, a committee of 3 lawyers, consisting of Colonel J. L. Hudson, Duncan D. McColl, and Charles Townsend. By order of the committee, I visited the office of Judge Townsend after early tea, which proved to be at 7:30 p.m., and was orally examined by those gentlemen in turn until 11:30 o'clock of the same evening. I am pleased to record the fact that I answered satisfactorily every question asked of me save one, and that related to marine law, which to us in Bennettsville was not of much interest, inasmuch as the nearest body of water to the town was the stagnant swamp at the foot of the hill in the rear of my little home, and the only running stream which I can now recall was the creek tributary to it, which in its course furnished our swimming hole. In making their report to the court on the following day, the committee said in part, "We find your applicant, John P. Green, not only qualified, but well qualified. I took the examination there instead of going to the state capitol and being admitted on motion because I crave the respect and professional assistance of the members of the Marlborough bar, which I cheerfully say was accorded to me as long as I practiced there. During the year and a half and more given to the practice there, I saved 2 lives. The third, John J. McQuaig White, indicted for murder, they had no varied degrees, only murder and manslaughter, made his escape from prison, plunged into the dismal swamp in the rear of the jail, and to my knowledge was never heard of again. One of my fortunate clients was Irene McRae, a colored girl not yet 17 years of age, who one hot July day gave birth to a child, cut its head off, and then got into a tub of cold water. Since she had no money and the other lawyers did not care for the case, she became my client, and adopting the defense of pure pearl mania, I secured a verdict of not guilty. Some mention of this defense was made in one of the Harper periodicals of that day. When we were impanelling the jury for the trial of that case, old Peter McCole, clerk of the court, who was nearly 100 years of age, and shook in his voice and his hands almost like an aspen, proceeded as follows. "John W. Crossland," he called. To the front came a Southern gentleman, owner of much land and erstwhile owner of numerous slaves, who tilled the soil for him. "Prisoner," said the aged clerk, "look on the juror. Juror, look on the prisoner." Then we both looked. "What say you?" he asked. Now I was in a quandary as to whether I should say, "Swear him," or "excused," for Crossland bore the reputation of having been a very cruel driver of his slaves, and it was reported that any one of his ex-slaves could be distinguished by the white patches of hair on his head where wounds had previously been inflicted, and I feared lest he should show prejudice against this colored girl in the deliberations of the jury. On the other hand, I knew that in weighing professional and scientific questions relating to the case he was just the man of all needed. So I said, "Swear him." He was made foreman of that jury, and by his elucidations of the technical questions growing out of the defense brought us safely through. The other case was that of a colored man who, in a drunken brawl, severed the femoral artery of another. I was one of the 3 who defended Frank Cook. He was duly convicted of murder and sentenced to be hung. After the gallows was erected at the earnest plea of his wife, who was soon to become a mother, I went to Columbus, and by a political bargain persuaded the late Governor Scott of Henry County, Ohio, who was then governor of South Carolina, and was afterwards tried in Henry County, Ohio, for murder and acquitted, to commute his sentence to life imprisonment. He was subsequently pardoned after I left the state, and for aught that I know is still living with that wife and his children. In the year 1903, after having finished a term of 9 years' service in the employ of the United States at Washington, of which more later on, I applied for admission to the bar of the District of Columbia, and in order to evade the requirement of a formal examination, I wrote to the late Duncan D. McCole, Esquire of Bennettsville, requesting him to send me a copy of the journal entry of my admission to the bar of South Carolina in 1870. His letter breathes such a spirit of friendliness that I shall record it, not more as one of the incidents of my career in South Carolina in my youth than as a testimonial of my high esteem and grateful remembrance of a Southern gentleman, scholar, and man of affairs, who recognized merit in all men, regardless of color or previous condition, and he lived a long and useful life. The letter follows. Bank of Marlborough, Bennettsville, South Carolina, May 2nd, 1903. Honorable J.P. Green, Washington, D.C. My dear sir, your favor of the 29th last month's reading. Am certainly glad to hear from you. Went to clerk's office and found the date of your admission to practice law entered on the minutes of the court. Had no trouble owing to your good recollection of date, etc. I enclose your certificate from the clerk of the court, under seal, showing you to be an attorney at law in this state, in good standing, etc., and copied in the certificate the order of the court admitting you. I hope it will answer your purpose and be all you desire. I paid him 50 cents for the certificate, but do not pay back to me, as I hope some time or other to get even in some other way. If you will notice, you were admitted to practice on my motion, and I am proud to say that while you practiced at this bar, you did great credit to yourself and the profession. I recall distinctly, although it has been 30 years, 32 years is exact, JPG, your defense of Alford Frank Cook, JPG, charged with murder. This was a case of infanticide The writer now refers to the Irene McRae case mentioned above. JPG, and your great skill and knowledge in successfully establishing the defense of poor peril mania. Hope you are well and doing well. Yours truly, D.D. McCall. State Senator Henry J. Maxwell, now deceased, treated me at first with utmost contempt. He was about 15 years my senior in age, a bricklayer by trade and a politician by profession. He was a South Carolinian by birth and was evidently proud of the fact. The colored people of the county, who were all active members of the Republican Party, almost blindly followed his leadership, and he dictated the policies pursued in the county, which were implicitly obeyed by them. In the Senate at Columbia he was facetiously denominated the Duke of Marlborough, and he commanded attention and exerted influence. I paid little attention to him at first, but when the fall campaign came on and he was a candidate for re-election, we became well-nigh chummy and not only visited each other, but sat on the same platform and addressed the same political gatherings. Here is yet another of those wise old saws of which I spoke in a former chapter, and which, as a rule, are eternally true. Politics make strange bedfellows. This was literally verified eventually when he and I, in Columbia, South Carolina, actually slept in the same bed together. During my brief political experience in and near Bennettsville, I faced 3 separate contingencies in which I suspect my life was endangered. The first was when on one pretty July afternoon in a grove near the village, I was delivering a political harangue in which I censured some of the methods resorted to by the Democratic Party. A large man, John W. Harrington by name, who was made fierce-looking by bushy whiskers, rushed at me with an ugly-looking knife and attempted to cut me with it. He was intercepted, however, by several of my auditors and disarmed. They, too, had big, sharp knives. My second jeopardy was on the 4th of July, 1871, when I, as orator of the day, was literally making the eagle scream on a platform erected on our little public square in Bennettsville, when Harris Covington, as Esquire, Democratic nominee for Congress, rushed forward, grasped me by one of my legs, and attempted to pull me down from the rostrum. Mr. Covington narrowly escaped being run through the body by a sword in the hands of a colored bystander, and a riot was prevented by the counsels of judicious persons present. The third jeopardy was self-made, and from this point of view I can see that my conduct was ill-advised and silly. The Greeley Democrats of the county had just adjourned a large meeting, which they had held on the public square, and with several of their Negro employees were preparing to return to their homes. I therefore, in the absence of Senator Maxwell, constituted myself Republican leader and declared that I would mount the vacant platform and answer the statements which had been made to the colored men in attendance by the speakers. Sheriff Joel Easterling, the long-whiskered, patriarchal Republican official, said to me, "Green, don't you do it. They will kill you if you persist. I, as sheriff of this county, will not guarantee you protection." Yet I mounted that platform and for 40 minutes preached a pure, unadulterated Abraham Lincoln Republicanism. They did not touch me, but in the next issue of the local paper there was a statement that after the adjournment of the Democratic meeting, a fellow by the name of Green, who came from nobody knows where and lives on nobody knows what, got up on the stand and harangued the Negroes. Occasionally he would awake to find Ku Klux Klan literature strewn near our front doors or tacked on the trunks of the large pine trees in the public square. I have never known whether the Dodgers, which carried at the top the death head and crossbones of the Ku Klux Klan, were a mere hoax or a dire threat and menace. Of one fact I am certain that caused us all to be quite apprehensive, and on many nights Maxwell, William Brewington, John Brewington, this writer, and others, armed to the teeth, took turns in patrolling the streets in the vicinity of our homes in order to prevent a surprised assault, and my own doors were locked, barred, and propped as a source of protection. On one first Monday, the day of the month, when the sheriff sold lands and effects by order of court, a half-drunken fellow, McQuaig by name, started in pursuit of me, to kill me, as he said. I heard of it, and arming myself with a long, sharp knife, pursued him. He dodged me, and that ended the fiasco. Early in 1872, I was elected delegate to the Republican State Convention, which held its sessions at Columbia, the capital of the state. They were present in the elegant hall of the House of Representatives, which had been furnished at a cost of $60,000, and contained cuspidors at a cost of $15 each, not only delegates from all parts of South Carolina, but many members of Congress, judges, public officials, and the governor of the state. During the deliberations of the Committee on Credentials, on motion of Captain Robert Smalls, of the steamboat planter fame, I was unanimously invited to address the convention. It came to me like the proverbial clap of thunder. However, I did not shrink, but, on the contrary, grasped the opportunity. Thomas Carlyle says, occasion, godlike, rushes storming on swift, perilous, like a whirlwind, like a swift lightning steed. Manfully thou shalt grasp him by the mane, and vault into thy seat on him, and ride and guide there thou. I took his advice. For nearly an hour I addressed that august assemblage, paying no more attention to the personnel of the assemblage or the coign of advantage from which I spoke, than if I had been speaking to a jury in the courthouse. The portion of my address which attracted most attention, and which was widely criticized by politicians, was that wherein I declared that the people should select as public servants men known to be intelligent and honest; that unless this policy were speedily adopted, they would be reading the handwriting on the wall; that the Reconstruction carpet-bag governments of the Southern States could exist no longer than they were sustained by the public opinion of the North, and that, failing in respect of that support, they would fall to rise no more. Coming down from the rostrum, the speaker's stand, Senator Allen of Greenville grasped my hand and said, "Mr. Green, you have made just the speech which I have desired to make all this session, but from policy's sake have not dared to do." I soon found that Senator Allen was correct, for on returning to Bennettsville I ascertained that a garbled report of my address had outrun me. It was reported and current that I had said that none save college-bred men should be elected to office, and since there were no men of that class amongst the Republican voters of that county, I readily deciphered the handwriting on the wall for me. My political name was henceforth Dennis. This convention elected me an alternate to the Philadelphia National Convention, which renominated President Grant for president. I represented the 1st Congressional District of South Carolina, and it was my first appearance in national politics. The swamp in the rear of my little home, at the foot of the hill, breathing forth poisonous miasmata during the summer season, having impaired my health and threatened the life of both my wife and our baby boy, I suddenly concluded that I would pull up my stakes and return to Cleveland, there, for better or for worse, to try the fates as a member of the Ohio bar. In less time than it takes to record these facts, I'd run over to the office of Colonel C. W. Dudley, the Nestor of the town, surrendered to him my deed and all claim on the hillside lot of land, giving to cousin William Brewington the horse which I was buying, and for the full payment of which he was surety; sold to him in bulk the contents of the little grocery, distributed gratis some and crated others of our meager household effects, and were en route towards Fayetteville, North Carolina. No tongue can ever express the joy of my wife when she clearly understood that she really and truly was leaving Bennettsville to return no more. Her gratitude to God and her husband knew no bounds, and she referred to the event during the remainder of her life. We had some true and tried friends there of both races who regretted to see us leave. Even Colonel Dudley, who generally represented the sentiment of the white people of the county, said to me, "If you had permitted the white people to take you up and fight Maxwell, you could have succeeded politically and otherwise." However, that policy was out of the question. I was colored, and I was a black. Abraham Lincoln, John Brown, Frederick Douglass, Republican, and everybody knew it. How then could I, with Democrats of that day, join hands and fight Maxwell and his hosts, many of whom walked from Red Bank, 20 miles distant, to vote for Ulysses S. Grant as against Horace Greeley? End of chapter 6.